Thanks, Chairman. Just to go back on a couple of things with Sinead there. Whatever type of producer groups is operating at sheep at the moment, I've watched a few of them and they're working well. There seems to be a resistance with the factories against accepting producer groups in the beef side of it. That's been a bit of information. Am I correct in saying, Sinead, that about 70% of our beef that's exported, or maybe more, goes to the UK for mince? Is that correct?
No.
No, Deputy, about 50% of our beef overall goes to the UK by value and by volume.
Yeah, and how much that is mince?
I'll come back to you on that in a moment. We'll just in terms of, do you mean in terms of?
In my eye, we're giving us figures and the huge volume of it. My understanding of the specs, because I've done a bit of digging on the specs with Board Bia, is that there's like 750,000 cuts, but there is, to equate to 250,000 to equate to 250,000 cattle, but you need 750,000 cattle to get enough out of it to be able to cater for it. So it's about 50% of our total, and it would be only 250,000 cattle if them all had the right cut for you, is what would be required for the specs, as again what goes everywhere else right around. I'm talking about in the full volume of cattle. I think, what is it, 1.4, 1.5 million, is that correct?
Yes, Deputy. I don't think the figure could be as high as you suggested in relation to mince, but I suppose the issue is that the UK is one of the highest paying beef markets in the world, and certainly UK retail is a highly priced sector. Now, obviously, their preference is for their own British product in the first instance, but I think Board Bia research would establish that Irish beef is very highly regarded by UK consumers, and they see it as almost equivalent to their own obvious national preference.
The one problem, and I'm not blaming Mr. Dunham, the one problem I have, how much did Grant Thornton get for these three reports? Hello.
Offhand, I can't remember, but we can find out.
The one problem I have with it is there's one report done on specs, and whether we like to believe it or whether we don't, I think we've gone to the wrong people, because whether we talk about, and in fairness, some of the, I know that some of the outside of the country did cooperate, but when you look at the value of an animal, gallstones, there's a heap of parts of an animal now at the moment. They're looking for them right around the world, and we talked about the fifth quarter, and you're talking about often and all the different things, but we have no genuine figure to know what is an animal worth. We don't know, even though we've gone through, and that's one thing that we don't know because we couldn't get the cooperation. But in my view, that's not a finished report. Second of all, you talked about the specs. In my view, it's the person, you have to actually do the survey in the shop or outside the door or wherever, like to see who vote for who, the same type of way. And until we do them things, we're going nowhere, because as has been pointed out by Matt and by others, there's nothing wrote on something. This animal was 36 months and it had 5 movements. At the moment, and I'm reiterating this, doesn't matter what you have at the moment, you can get top dollar for them. And that's because of supply and demand. And I'm just concerned that we seem to have 2 reports from Grant Thornton that don't seem to be finalised, because they say they couldn't get the information in one. Now, and the second one, in my view, they didn't go to the people that needs to. And if I was sent in a lorry for 100 cattle to Dublin and came home with 70 or 80, they'd be queer looking. So I think that they should be compiling, finishing them reports in a different way. You can find out any information nowadays like, it's easy to look at what the price of the stuff is on the shelf. If our factories tell them, right, this is a very simple analogy. If I'm selling to 5 different companies in 5 different countries, I know who they are, and they're well known and they're on the shelf. So we can walk along the shelf and we can look at the price of the stuff, how much a kilo it is. Did the factories, for what's being exported here in Ireland, did they give all the information of what they're getting when they're exporting? And like, you wouldn't have to be a mathematician then to do it up. Would that be fair to say? Did you get the information from the factories here, what they get from the retailers in the different countries that they're selling to?
That wasn't the problem, Deputy. The problem was what the retailers or the food service operators were getting for the beef themselves. That's the information that couldn't be got. The information in regard to what the factories were getting is compiled, and that's how Grant Thornton were able to get the figure for the total value of the product exported from Ireland or sold within Ireland. So that wasn't the difficulty. And it's not as simple as going along, as I understand it, and saying, well, we can find out what the retailer was getting because we look at the price he's charging. First of all, it's nearly impossible to do that on any sort of a representative basis. But secondly, a big proportion of what we sell goes into food service. And food service product comes out as a beef burger or some other sort of a product, which is mixed up with other agricultural products in the plate that people buy. So it's not an issue which is very easily solved by doing a sort of a spot look at what's on a retail shelf. And Grant Thornton had expertise. They did their best. They couldn't get the final version, but they did, or the final price, but they did get the prices in between, and at least that was beneficial to understanding what sort of gaps there were between the farmer price and the price that the beef was sold onto the final customer, but not the final consumer. And doing a survey of consumers and asking them what they thought about specs, etc., wouldn't necessarily give you anything other than that consumers probably don't know an awful lot about specs. But if you're not selling directly to the consumer, you're selling directly to people who are either manufacturing, cooking, or retailing the beef themselves, and they're the people who create the demand for Irish beef, who are the demand for Irish beef, and that's what Grant Thornton. They're the people that Grant Thornton had to try and deal with.